Snow. Not the gentle flurry of a Christmas film, but a dense, viscous mass, thick as glue, as if the sky itself was trying to strangle all sound and light. This climate is no longer weather. It is an imposition, a wall separating my world from whatever awaits us just 5 kilometers ahead. I tapped the dashboard of the old Jeep. The clock has been dead for years, and the radio only spits out a dry hiss. But Lucky, my black Newfoundland mix, lay curled comfortably in the back seat, his golden eyes half closed. He only stirred when a sound imperceptible to the human ear reached him, signaling that we were not truly alone. "You know," I whispered, my breath crystallizing in a white cloud in the frigid cabin. "People come to Isgärd, the ice citadel, for its beauty. They hear about the Rune Sky Festival, about the Norse legends, about the silence." I picked up a ragged map, where Isgärd was marked by a small, solitary ink smudge, far from any major highway. But this isn't peace, it's nowhere. We never use the word isolated, we use blockaded. This geographical blockade creates a spiritual one. Isgärd sits on an old seam of the world, where boundaries blur. The things you call monsters, or myths, they are not mystical at all. They are working creatures, organized, and most importantly, bound by ancient laws and covenants. They exist within a system that mortals have forgotten, a system where language is the building material, and truth is the foundation. This is what you must engrave in your core before we get there. Those entities cannot lie. This isn't a moral choice. This is a physical law, rigid as the ice. They can evade, they can shift phrasing, they can suggest falsehoods, but they can never utter a statement that is definitively, fully untrue. And this is our only advantage. We can lie like breathing, we can bend the truth as we please, but we must learn to hear what they say, and more importantly, what they don't say. If you can force them into an affirmation that goes against their intent, they will be neutralized. Conversely, your deceit, whether accidental or intentional, will be treated as a breach of covenant, a territorial infringement. You will be dealt with not as a victim, but as a lawbreaker, and the punishment will arrive precisely according to the value of that lie. Existence in Isgärd is a negotiation of language, I said, turning the wheel. That's why the 3 rules I'm about to give you are not suggestions. They are commandments. Lucky shifted, taking a long, deep inhale, and I knew the time was right. The blizzard was beginning to dissolve into large, separate snowflakes, revealing dark blue and bright red wooden houses peeking through the icy fog. They looked cozy, smoke curling from their chimneys, and windows glowing with inviting yellow light. But Isgärd has taught me that warmth is often the perfect trap. The first rule concerns the threshold, I continued. The entities living on the edge of town don't need to pretend to be normal folk, but they need an invitation. This rule was created to ensure human sovereignty within private space. When you cross a threshold without declaration, you forfeit that sovereignty. Always knock 3 firm times. 3 is the number of affirmation, and say exactly, "Mortal here." Requesting entry. You must use the precise word mortal. This is your declaration of race, biological limitation, and your most basic right, protection within the home. I explained that non-human entities cannot declare themselves mortal. If they did, they would violate the law of truth and incur punishment themselves. They won't risk it. I told him about Martin, an old friend, a freelance photographer. He thought he was clever. Martin knocked on the door of a seemingly abandoned house, and when he heard a husky reply, he tried to change the phrasing. "Stranger here, asking for refuge," Martin had said, and the voice from within replied, "Enter, stranger." Martin thought he was safe. I sighed. He thought he'd avoided the awkwardness of naming his identity, but he offered an ambiguous designation. Stranger is a designation anyone can use, humans and otherwise. The shadow at the threshold confirmed his identity as a stranger and invited him in, without having to declare itself mortal. When we found Martin that spring, he was sitting motionless in a wooden chair by the fireplace, his clothes intact, but his face utterly vacant, as if someone had spooned out all consciousness and soul through his ears. The house was ice cold, though the fire still burned. If you knock, and the inside replies, "Enter, mortal," you are safe. The occupant has publicly affirmed their identity. But if you only hear "enter" or any other phrase that skirts racial affirmation, turn around and run. If you step across that threshold after a deficient invitation, you become their property. It's that simple. I pulled out an old copper coin from my wallet, but it wasn't a Tro-Ring coin. This is our money. Their money, you'll recognize immediately. The second rule concerns greed, a sickness that Isgärd never cures. Do not pick up, touch, or use the Tro-Ring coins. Tro-Ring coins are copper coins plated in gold, always cold to the touch, and always inscribed with the image of a Ferris wheel, the Tro-Ring. They appear by chance, on windowsills, in the pockets of old clothes, or spilled from a crack in the ice. They are the traps of the Zwerg, I explained. He's not a fairy tale dwarf. He's a transactional entity, a soulless accountant who lives deep within the ice ring. He never refuses a deal, and he despises deceit fiercely. Jim, the fox hunter I mentioned, was a textbook example of a supernatural financial disaster. Jim needed a large sum of money to pay off a smuggler to the south. In desperation, Jim found those glittering coins and immediately thought they were valuable. He used them to set the price for a deal with the Zwerg. In exchange for this life, give me enough real money to pay my debt. The Zwerg doesn't lie. He agreed. A few days later, Jim had his money. But after that, Jim couldn't eat, couldn't drink, couldn't scream. When we found him, he was trying to tear his own lips away with his hands. The Tro-Ring coins are fake currency. They hold no actual value in the Zwerg's monetary system, I said, my voice hardening. When Jim used fake money to purchase a real commodity, the debt payment, he deceived the frozen accountant. He violated the law of truth. The Zwerg had to rebalance the transaction. What holds equivalent value to the language that was exploited? The fake money. The tool that creates language, the tool that expresses value. Jim's tongue. The Zwerg took his tongue, but not with a knife. I shivered, remembering. It was retracted from the inside. His mouth remained intact externally, but the tongue had shriveled, hardened, and his vocal cords stopped working. He died of starvation and thirst in absolute silence. The debt was paid, but the price was his ability to communicate. If you see a Tro-Ring coin, you have been noticed. Perhaps the Zwerg is assessing your greed. Leave them where they lie. Sheer indifference is the only winning play. They will vanish when they realize you won't use them. The sky to the north began to change color. A pale green ribbon of Aurora began to undulate, like a spectral river flowing backward into the air. That's what you came to see, right? I pointed at the light. It's beautiful, but it is also the avenue of the departed. The third rule concerns the innocence of death and the intrusion of private space. After viewing the ruined sky, you must go to a third place and stay there for at least 1 hour before returning home. In Isgärd culture, the Aurora is the road the souls use to travel. Most go straight up, but some, those with ties too strong, those who died by accident, or those who are too lonely, are pulled back by Isgärd's gravity. They are harmless on the street or in public spaces, as they are constrained by human law and the rules of the other entities. However, they are paranormal hitchhikers. Anyone who stares too long at the light can find themselves shadowed by a soul. You have to understand, these souls are not demons. They are just intensely homesick. But their persistent presence is deadly. If you bring them home, you have unknowingly invited them into your space. And once invited, they have full operational rights. The process starts slowly. You'll find objects rearranged, doors swinging open, small moans in the night. Then it becomes biological. Unexplained fevers, crushing headaches, rapid deterioration. They suck your life energy like weeds drawing nutrients from the soil. The third place is your safe buffer, I emphasized. It can be the frozen mug pub, a hotel lobby, or a convenience store. Just order a coffee, read a newspaper, pretend to text. Just 1 hour. 1 hour in a public setting, with witnesses, with human hustle. Souls hate busy environments. They will lose interest and move on to find the solitude necessary for their journey. Don't ever go straight home. Don't ever. The storm had fully given way to a chilling stillness. The gentle yellow light of Isgärd town was now clearly visible ahead. A large snowplow was slowly advancing to clear the blockaded section of road. The lesson was over. I looked directly into the man's eyes, ensuring that the coldness in my voice had penetrated him deeper than the cold of the snow. "One last time, friend," I said, my hand on the ignition. "3 things. Always declare mortal, at the threshold to affirm humanity and demand rights. Tro-Ring Coins are death. Never deceive the frozen accountant. And always use a third place after seeing the lights to shake off uninvited guests. In Isgärd, doubt costs lives. If you violate a rule, even out of disrespect or forgetting a single word, you automatically accept their rules, and they will act with the precision of law. I cranked the jeep, the engine roaring loudly, shattering the silence. The snowplow was close now, its colossal headlights illuminating the road into town. I shifted the gear stick. I've done my job. I'm not your guardian. You don't have to believe, but you do have to comply. Because if you die here, you won't become a homesick soul. You will become a new entity, bound by their rules. And the only question left is whether you will be the next monster. The jeep slowly rolled forward toward Isgärd, where the ice and the light awaited. Welcome to Isgärd, mortal. The colossal snowplow groaned, clearing a narrow path for our jeep to enter Isgärd. The town was no tourism brochure fantasy. It was a block of grim, gray architecture, built to withstand the perpetual winter, not to welcome visitors. The snow swallowed all sound, creating a crushing silence where every footstep sounded like an explosion. Your lodge is supposed to be the Frostbite Inn, 2 blocks west, I said, as we sped past the deserted central square. But I booked you at Thorson's. Frostbite has been empty for a year, though they still keep the lights on. They, he asked, his voice tight. The things that want you inside. You have to remember, Isgärd relies on tourism. But here, tourism is a series of occult transactions where certain hosts demand more than just rent. I pulled up in front of a small, wooden house painted an icy blue. Thorson's Inn was the only place that looked genuinely warm, with smoke curling from its chimney. I only take you this far. I continued, my hand still on the steering wheel. From here on, you face Isgärd alone. I gave you the rules. Your job is to follow them. First job, secure lodging. Good luck. Lucky nudged my hand, its golden eyes seeming to offer their own warning. I saw him hesitate, but he had paid for this trip, and there was no turning back until the next blizzard arrived. I waited until he stepped out of the vehicle, his heavy backpack slumping on his shoulders. Remember the first commandment, I growled. It is not a polite greeting. I spun the vehicle around and disappeared back into the rapidly falling snow, leaving him standing before his first threshold. He stood before Thorson's Inn, feeling the bone-deep cold that seemed to freeze even his tears. He approached the door, raising his hand to deliver 3 decisive knocks. 1, 2, 3. He took a deep breath, pouring all his energy and conviction into the first rule. Mortal soul requests entrance. A few seconds of silence dragged by. He could almost hear his own heart pounding. Then, a voice answered from inside. It was warm, low, and inviting, like that of a grandmother baking bread. Oh, stranger. Come in. The room is ready. He clenched his fists. Oh, stranger. Come in. The words, mortal soul, were absent from the response. It had sidestepped the crucial confirmation. The lure of convenience, of warmth, almost won. He had endured a long, grueling journey. That doorway promised a comfortable sleep. But he clearly remembered my severe expression when I'd said, if you cross the threshold without declaration, you grant them power and agree to become part of the menu. He took a step back, feeling a chilling draft, not of snow, emanating from the doorframe. He stared at the small window beside the door, where a vague shadow seemed to stand, utterly silent. He turned his back, hurrying away from the front yard. He didn't look back, but he could feel the disappointment, the anger, the hunger radiating from the house he had just rejected. He continued walking through the gloom until he saw a single, yellow light shining, dangling over a faded sign, the frozen mug. He repeated the ritual. 3 decisive knocks. Mortal soul requests entrance. This time, the answering voice was slightly raspy, as if the person had just been woken up, but it held an unmistakable clarity. Welcome, mortal soul. We still have hot coffee. He sighed with relief, pushing the door open. The warmth, the smell of burnt wood and black coffee rushed into his nostrils, chasing away the terrifying cold outside. Inside the frozen mug, there were only 2 people, an older, robust woman with her hair in 2 thick braids, wiping down the bar, and a man in a wool cap reading a newspaper in the corner. I'm Aurora, the woman said, putting her cloth down. Martha's Thorson Inn, was it? I heard your knock. He nodded, setting his backpack down. They didn't answer the greeting correctly. Aurora smirked, showing no surprise. The Real Martha moved south last summer. The four-legged ones took over the house after the last Rune Sky Festival. You did right, mortal soul. She poured him a mug of coffee. He paid with a crumpled bill. As he counted his change, something glittering on the countertop caught his attention. It was a copper coin, but exquisitely gilded. On its surface, instead of a monarch's portrait, was the engraving of a gigantic, moving Ferris wheel, a Tro-Ring or loop bait. He instantly remembered my warning, the loop bait coin. He reached out to touch it, curious about the feel of the metal, but his hand stopped halfway. Aurora, who had her back turned arranging cups, suddenly spun around, her face ashen. She stared intensely at the coin, not at him. Don't touch it, she whispered. You've seen it, mortal soul. Now you've been noticed. She quickly grabbed a thick napkin, using it to pinch the coin as if it were a scorpion. She avoided direct skin contact. Then, she walked to the wood stove, opened the door, and threw the coin hard into the center of the flames. There was no sound. Immediately, the coin vanished as if it had never existed, leaving only a brief wisp of gray smoke with a faint, sulfuric scent. You're a foreigner, aren't you? Aurora said, her eyes piercing him. You already know about Tro-Ring? He nodded. My guide told me about the dwarf hunter. And the story of Jim. Jim was a greedy fool. He tried to use those coins to buy a shipment of hunted fox furs without paying tax. The dwarf hunter knew Jim was cheating, because the loop bait coin is worth nothing but temptation. When the deal was finalized, Tro-Ring lied to Jim that he had paid enough. It wasn't really a lie, because the hunter claimed the value of those trash coins was sufficient. But when Jim got home, the true price was set. Aurora leaned on the counter. These things cannot lie, mortal soul. They only create circumstances where their truth is different from yours. The dwarf hunter's truth was, if you use fake currency to buy something, you must pay with something real, and what you tried to buy wasn't currency. It was your tongue, your ability to speak. Aurora looked him squarely in the eye, her voice growing serious. You've passed 2 tests in 10 minutes. You didn't cross the threshold, and you didn't pick up that coin. That means you have a chance to survive until the festival. He rented a small room above the cafe, where he could hear the comforting crackle of firewood from the kitchen below. In the stillness of the evening, he truly felt the isolation. Isgärd had no cell service. The internet only worked sporadically if the Aurora was out. It forced him to confront himself, and the strange noises echoing beyond the wooden walls. He couldn't sleep. He knew this peace was temporary. The Rune Sky Festival was scheduled for tomorrow night. He sat up and opened the window curtain. Outside, the city was completely shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the faint streetlights on the poles. He noticed a truck parked across the road, its door wide open. No one was inside, but a fishing net was piled high with frozen cod. And then he saw them. 3 tall, gaunt entities, like walking bones, stood silently next to the truck. Their skin was a pale gray blue, reflecting the light from the street lamps. They did not move, they just stood there, motionless, as if waiting. He realized these were the creatures I had warned him about. The ones with unblinking eyes and overly wide smiles, the things that couldn't declare themselves mortal soul, because they bore no flesh and blood. He closed the curtain slowly, making no sound. They were waiting. They were hunting. And they operated under a strict code. They could not lie. If he obeyed the rules, they were bound. If he broke them, he signed his own consent. The next morning, Aurora handed him an old, hand-drawn map. The weather forecast says the Aurora will be clearest around 10 p.m., she said, pointing to a spot on the map. This is the best viewing point on Icetooth Hill. She circled 2 other locations. One was the frozen mug, where he was currently staying. The other was the old library, which had been converted into a small museum on the region's fishing history. After you finish watching the Rune Sky Festival, you must go to the 3rd place, she emphasized. This place cannot be your home, nor can it be where you watch the Aurora. You need a neutral space. The library, he asked. Exactly. It stays open until midnight on nights with the Aurora. The spirits cannot enter a place considered public without explicit invitation. They will latch onto you. They will follow you. You need to shake them off. An hour in the old library, among the books, will show them you are not their personal target. And if I come straight back here? They will follow you up the stairs and into your room. They cannot be tricked by the mortal soul rule because you've already been invited here. Once they enter your personal space, they become relentless harassers. Small accidents, illness, insomnia. They don't kill you outright. They destroy you slowly. They love despair. He stared at the map, feeling the coldness of the thin paper. The Rune Sky Festival was not a light show. It was a display of the spirit world's power. And after it ended, the highway of the dead would open, and he needed to find shelter for his soul. He had survived the threshold test and resisted the temptation of the dwarf hunter. The final, most dangerous test awaited him tomorrow night, under the light of the spirits. The thick, viscous snow had sealed off Highway 93, holding us only about 5 kilometers from Isgärd, the ice fortress. Lucky my black dog, and I had to wait inside the old jeep. Isgärd is a slight mispronunciation of an Old Norse word, a place of nothing but ice, cod, and the Rune Sky Festival. You came here for the festival, but you need to understand that isolation here is a spiritual fact. You are in nowhere, literally and metaphorically. We have neighbors that are not human. The things you call monsters are not myths. They live by specific, ancient rules. The most important rule is this: those entities cannot lie. This is the single human advantage you must exploit to survive this holiday. I have to ensure you understand 3 basic laws before you set foot in Isgärd, because if you make one mistake, you won't get a second chance to correct it. The first and simplest rule, yet the one that has saved the most lives. Always declare yourself as I am the mortal before entering any dwelling. You see those houses peeking through the snow on the outskirts? They look cozy, but they might not be safe. Be it my house, the coffee shop, or the convenience store, you must always knock, 3 sharp raps, and say clearly, loudly, I am the mortal. I seek entrance. You must not use any other phrasing. The entities that live on the town's periphery, the things with smiles too wide and eyes that don't blink, cannot declare themselves the mortal if they are not flesh and blood. If you knock and hear a voice reply, enter, mortal, you are safe, because the resident has confirmed your identity and demonstrated they are human. But if you knock, and the reply is merely, enter, or come in, stranger, you must never cross that threshold. They have successfully avoided declaring themselves human. If you enter without their explicit affirmation, you grant them power and agree to become part of the menu. The second rule involves greed and transaction. If you see small, gilded copper coins etched with the image of a Ferris wheel, ignore them. Do not pick them up, do not touch them, and certainly do not try to use them. We call them Ferris coins, Tro-Ring coins. They appear randomly. They are Hauder's work. The dwarf hunter transacts business. Let me tell you about Jim, a greedy fox hunter. When he needed cash to pay off a debt, Jim found the Ferris coins on his table and decided to use them to bargain with the dwarf hunter, an entity living deep within the ice belt. Durswurg never refuses a deal, and Jim got what he wanted. A few days later, we found Jim. He was alive, but he couldn't speak, couldn't swallow. His mouth looked as if it had been sewn shut from the inside. It turned out the Ferris coins were counterfeit, worthless. When Jim used fake money for a real agreement, the dwarf hunter took the thing equivalent in value to the currency. Jim's language, his tongue. If you see a Ferris coin, you have been noticed. Do not try to cheat the entities that cannot lie. Just leave them where they lie. They will disappear on their own. The final rule concerns the Aurora, the very thing you paid to come and see. After viewing the Rune Sky Festival, the Aurora, you must go to a third place and stay there for at least 1 hour before going home. The Aurora in Isgärd is not just a physical phenomenon. It is the death road. It carries souls to their rest, but some souls turn back due to unfinished business or missing home too much. They cling to those who look up at the sky. These souls cannot harm you on the street, but if they follow you into your home, you have officially invited them into your private space, and they will become aggressive. They will haunt you to death, starting with disarranged furniture, escalating to mysterious illnesses, and finally, fatal accidents. So, after the Rune Sky stops dancing, do not go straight home. Go somewhere else, the frozen mug, the convenience store. Order a coffee, and pretend to be busy. You need 1 hour in that third place for those spirits to lose interest and move on. My voice dropped as the blizzard began to ease. To the north, The pale green band of the Aurora was starting to reveal itself. I pointed toward the end of the road, where a large snowplow was slowly advancing, coming to rescue us from the gridlock. The lesson is over. I restarted the Jeep. Remember these 3 things. Always declare, I am the mortal. The fairest coin is death, and always find a 3rd place after the light show. I have done my job. You may not believe me, but in Isgärd, skepticism comes at a high price. If you survive this holiday, you will understand. I placed my hand on the gear shift, looking straight into your eyes. Welcome to Isgärd, friend. Have a pleasant holiday, and may you not become the next monster. The heavy snowplow led the way, and my old Jeep slid through the deep snow and icy slush, entering the outskirts of Isgärd. The town was small but solidly built, with dark wooden houses nestled close together, their steeply pitched roofs covered in ice and snow. Warm, yellow lights spilled from the windows, creating a deceptively intimate feeling. I dropped you off in front of the small house you rented, tucked away behind a sparse pine forest. This house was probably an ideal location for a tourist seeking tranquility, but it was also the perfect intersection between the mortal world and the ice belt. This is your place. The spare key is under the cracked plant pot on the porch, I said, and Lucky let out a soft growl at my feet. The dog always reacted like this when approaching the boundary. This house, according to local lore, has been vacant for a long time. You are the first guest in 3 years. I looked at you intently, ensuring you had memorized everything. Rule 1, right now? What are you about to do? You replied. Knock 3 sharp times, and say, I am the mortal. I seek entrance. Exactly. Don't use please, don't use allow me. Only use I seek entrance. The language must be precise, like an oath. Pray that no one answers you. An empty house is far better. I didn't wait for your reply, shifting the gear and driving off, leaving you alone amidst the snow, already compacted by the vehicle traffic. You pulled your suitcase, walking up to the cold wooden steps. The front door was made of old oak, with no porch light. Only a flickering street lamp cast long shadows. The place was terrifyingly quiet, a silence you realized was not the stillness of nature, but the silence of something listening. You found the key, but following the rule you had been taught, you couldn't unlock the door immediately. You took a deep breath, the cold cutting into your lungs. You raised your hand, knocking 3 sharp raps. Knock, 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 the sound echoing dryly in the air. You focused all your energy into your voice, shouting, I am the mortal. I seek entrance. A moment of silence stretched, so long you thought you had succeeded, that the house was indeed empty. Then, from deep within, a voice answered. It was the voice of an older woman, strangely hoarse and sweet, like frozen honey. Enter, mortal. Your heart hammered, a mix of relief and terror. She had used the correct phrase. Enter, mortal. You reached for the doorknob, but then a cold thought shot through your head, recalling my words. If you knock and hear a voice reply, Enter, mortal, you are safe, because the resident has confirmed your identity and demonstrated they are human. But you didn't just knock. You knocked and shouted. You suddenly realized the subtle, yet vital, difference. The woman inside had repeated exactly what you said, but she had not self-identified as the mortal. She had only confirmed that you were the mortal. You recoiled 1 step, feeling your skin chill. If she were human, she should have replied with a phrase affirming her own identity, or at least a common welcoming phrase, such as, come in, I'm the owner. Her exact repetition of your declaration, without adding any other information, was a clever way to circumvent the commandment not to lie. She didn't lie that she was human, but she also didn't affirm that she wasn't human. If you stepped inside, you would have accepted the agreement that you were a guest of the thing inside, a thing that was allowed to skirt the rules of identity. You dropped your hand from the doorknob. I apologize, you said, trying to keep your voice calm. I have the wrong house. I am the mortal, but I will return later. You turned away, not running, not rushing. You walked backward down the steps. The door did not open. As you crossed the snowy gate, a low laugh echoed from inside the house, like shattering glass. The woman's voice rang out, no longer sweet or hoarse, but sharp and full of disappointment. You came so close, mortal. Next time, remember the difference between a greeting and an affirmation. You did not look back, quickening your pace toward the flickering neon green light of a cafe down the road. You needed to find a public place, a place with many people, where the language of truth was not so dangerous. The Frozen Mug Cafe was not fancy, but it was noisy and full of smoke, with locals wearing heavy coats. You stepped inside, feeling the warmth wash over your face and the safety of the crowd. You ordered a dark, thick coffee, your hands still shaking from the cold and tension. You sat down at a worn leather booth. Even among these mortals, you felt Isgärd's isolation. Everyone looked at you, the only stranger, with searching eyes. You wondered, among the people sipping coffee here, how many had been tricked by a sweet voice behind a door? How many had vanished for using the wrong word? You placed your hand on the tabletop to steady yourself. And then you saw it. Right next to the base of your coffee cup, lying between the streaks of water and spilled coffee, was a small, tarnished copper object, glinting under the dim ceiling lights. It was etched with the miniature image of a Ferris wheel. A Ferris coin. It appeared randomly. How long had it been following you? Since you entered the cafe? Or had the dwarf hunter been tracking you since I dropped you off at the rental house? You remembered Jim, who lost his tongue due to greed. You forced yourself not to look at it anymore. Do not pick it up, do not touch it, and certainly do not try to use it. You closed your eyes. You didn't know why it appeared. Perhaps it was a second test, a subtle invitation to transaction after you escaped the threshold trap. When you opened your eyes again, the coin was still there, as if mocking you. You called the waiter, an older man with a thick salt and pepper beard. "Excuse me, could you wipe down this table for me, please?" You asked, pointing to the coffee stain. The waiter nodded, picked up his cloth, and swept the Ferris coin away along with the coffee spill. He paid no attention to the coin at all. It was gone. You let out a long breath, realizing you had used absolute truth to deceive the dwarf hunter by never acknowledging the coin's existence, only requesting the cleanup of a mess. You looked out the window. The sky had darkened, and far to the north, the first green light of the Death Road was starting to flicker, signaling the impending start of the Rune Sky Festival. You were still alive. But tonight, you needed to remember the third rule. He froze, his hand inches from the handle of the frozen mug. "Welcome, stranger." It wasn't a lie. That was the terror of it. The old woman, constrained by her own past trauma and the silent bargain she'd made, could not affirm him as a mortal, and she could not call him a lie. He was merely an anonymous person, a stranger. And if he entered, the unspoken rules dictated that the establishment itself might welcome the entities pursuing him, because he had failed to secure his status as an invited guest of a fellow mortal. He took a step back, the chill that had blown through his own cabin after Henrik's mistake now seeming benign compared to the cold dread settling over him. The frozen mug, his last scheduled sanctuary, was compromised. He had maybe 50 minutes left before the sun threatened to rise, and he was standing on the most dangerous ground in Isgärd, the open street, during the height of the Rune Sky Festival. The aurora above thrashed harder, the streaks of emerald and violet twisting into more defined, hungry shapes. He had to move. The rules demanded a third place, a public, known space, neither home nor wilderness. He sprinted away from the square, ignoring the local crowd that had gathered, now staring upward in hypnotic silence. He felt the silver gaze of the soaring entities track his movement, like spotlights searching for cover. He needed a structure, something that had been built for community, but was currently abandoned. 2 blocks down, nestled between 2 snow-laden pines, he saw it. The old municipal library annex, closed for renovations, its windows boarded up, a faded sign proclaiming its temporary status as a place of waiting. A waiting place. That sounded morbidly appropriate. He stumbled onto the porch. This building was not someone's home, but it was property, a boundary. The door was locked, but the small, roofed porch offered partial shelter. He decided to test the rule. He couldn't enter, but could he claim the threshold? He set his bag down against the frozen timber of the locked door, turning his body toward the street. He performed the ritual again, softly, hoping to satisfy the rule without drawing unnecessary attention from the nearby spectral hunters. Knock, knock, knock. Mortal here. Seeking entry. Silence. Profound, absolute silence. No warm voice, no strained, compromised invitation, just the sound of the wind rattling the boards. This was better than the compromised safety of the frozen mug. The silence meant the place was empty, unclaimed by either mortal or ancient entity. It was neutral ground, but it offered no verbal confirmation of safety. He leaned against the wood, pulling his thick gloves over his hands. He was exposed, but anchored to a boundary. The real danger was not physical invasion, but the manipulation of his senses, the psychological aware of the entities waiting just outside the perimeter of his self-declared sanctuary. He watched the street. The lights were dimmer here, further from the square. He was a black silhouette in a sea of white. And then he heard it. Not a physical sound, but a resonance, a vibration in the air, a sound that belonged to the atmosphere itself. He saw the first shape descend from the Aurora. It was long, narrow, and shimmered like oil on water, one of the silver spirits he had seen clinging to the sky. It drifted over the street, scanning. It paused directly above the library annex. The freezing air suddenly felt oppressive, heavy with expectation. "We know you are waiting," a thought echoed in his mind, sharp and clear, though no sound was made. "Waiting is tedious. Why don't you come out?" He gripped the frozen wood behind him. He would not engage. He would not speak. He would wait the required time, and they could not breach the boundary of the uninvited. The silver shape remained, hovering, observing the mortal attempting to claim neutrality in a place where neutrality was forbidden. He remembered the old woman at the frozen mug. She had lost her voice because she had traded for something with the dwarf hunter's Tro-Ring Coins. Yet, she had still given him a truth, a compromised truth, but a truth nonetheless. He was a stranger. Henrik failed because he did not know the rules. The old woman lived because she knew how to use silence and limited, truthful language to avoid further transactions. The key was the no-lying rule. Entities, and those compromised by them, could not lie. If this waiting place was about to be overwhelmed, he needed to know where the next actual safe place was, and only a compromised, truthful mortal could tell him. He looked back toward the main square. The risk of leaving his temporary sanctuary was immense, but the guarantee of a truthful answer was worth the gamble. He pushed off the wall and began walking rapidly back toward the frozen mug, knowing the silver spirits would now follow his heat trail, but relying on their inability to violate the boundary rules without an invitation. He found the old woman still behind the counter. She was meticulously wiping down the same spot of the wooden bar with a damp cloth, over and over. Her eyes were dull, fixed on the wood. He approached the bar, keeping his distance, careful not to cross the threshold into the serving area. "I apologize for disturbing your peace," he whispered, ensuring the question was phrased carefully, avoiding any ambiguity. She continued wiping the bar, ignoring him. "I know you cannot lie," he pressed on. "I know what happened to your voice. But Isgärd demands we speak the truth, doesn't it?" Her movement stuttered. She stopped wiping the bar. Slowly, her eyes lifted to meet his. Fear, deep and chilling, was evident. "I am asking for information, not a transaction," he continued. "And I promise, I will not invite you to speak if you do not want to." He took a slow breath, formulating the critical question, using the most neutral terms he knew, referencing the Isgärd rules of safety. "Tell me this truth, please," he said. "Excluding this establishment, and excluding my rented cabin, where is the closest third place in this town where I, a self-declared mortal, can receive an affirmation of safety from another living mortal between now and sunrise?" He knew the entity controlling the transaction laws could not allow her to lie if the question was phrased as a demand for a factual location regarding the safety rules of Isgärd. Her fear was palpable, but the constraints of the town were stronger. She swallowed hard. Her lips barely moved, as if the physical act of forming words caused her pain, or perhaps invoked the presence of the dwarf hunter. She pointed, her finger trembling slightly, not at a sign, but across the main street. "The old post office," she rasped, the sound like dry leaves scattering on ice. "It has an active wire." Then, she dropped the cloth, covered her mouth with both hands, and returned to staring at the counter, her eyes pleading with him to leave her alone with her silence. The old post office, a place of established communication, still officially connected to the outside world, an active wire. That meant it was technically still part of the mortal infrastructure, even if closed. He glanced at the clock above the bar. 40 minutes remaining. He thanked her with a solemn nod and fled the frozen mug, the memory of her painful, true words now his only guide through the chilling darkness of Isgärd. The old post office. He had a new destination. The yellow snowplow roared, tearing through the compact silence and the narrow fear inside the jeep. As it passed, it left behind a narrow, wet path, steaming cold, opening up the unofficial gate to Isgärd, the ice citadel. I looked at him one last time, my gaze not one of a friend but of a warden who had just sold him an expensive survival insurance package called the truth. Lucky, my black dog, whined softly. He hated being back here. The snow is melting, and the ice pool is calling your name, I said, my voice low beneath the engine noise. I'll take you to the central square. Your lodging is the Rime Hearth Inn. Remember what I said, every single word. We drove slowly into Isgärd. The town was not a beautiful resort like in the brochure photos. It was a rigid, gray mass of architecture, built with stone and dark wood, as if it were enduring the cold itself. The heavy smell of salted cod and melting ice hung in the air. I stopped the car beside an ice sculpture of a wolf in the empty square. This is where we part ways. I have my own work. I'm not staying. You walk from here. He opened the door, and the icy air rushed into the cabin like a sharp blade. I hope you listen to me, because right now, isolation is your friend. Do not seek help anywhere but within yourself. Good luck. I didn't wait for his answer. I revved the engine, turned the Jeep around with the crunch of tires on ice, and quickly drove away, leaving him alone to face the tall, dark roofs and the sky beginning to turn a pale green. He stood there, the wind whistling past his ears, his breath freezing into a thin mist. The Rime Hearth Inn. He started walking, trying to compartmentalize the 3 rules that had just been crammed into his mind. 1. Knock and name yourself. 2. Do not touch the Tro-Ring coin. 3. The 3rd place after the Aurora. Immediately, Isgärd presented its first test. He turned into the 3rd alley, following the hand-drawn map I had given him. He saw a faded sign, written in ancient runes and Latin, Herden Inn. It looked old, cozy in an inviting way, with soft yellow lights spilling through the frosted windows. He believed it was the Rime Hearth. He walked up the 3 creaking wooden steps. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This was the moment he had to decide. Was I a crazy faith seller or a lifesaver? He knocked 3 decisive times on the heavy oak door. Knock, knock, knock. And then he spoke, trying to keep his voice from trembling. But he made a mistake. A mortal here. May I enter? Inside the door, silence stretched. Then, a voice spoke, low and strangely sweet, like frozen honey. Do come in, stranger. Do enter. He froze. His heart hammered in his chest. The mortal here, requesting entry. Those were the exact words. He had changed one word. He had failed to compel them to use the word, the mortal, in their reply. He swallowed hard, his trembling hand reaching for the cold brass doorknob. He stared at the small gap beneath the door. He felt as if an unblinking gaze was looking back at him from within. The doubt instantly vanished. It wasn't an overlooked courtesy. It was a deliberate avoidance. They had not called him the mortal. He backed up, 1 step, then 2. He turned his back on the door without opening it. He heard a very faint sigh from inside, a sigh of disappointment or of delayed appetite. He ran, without looking back, until he returned to the square where I had dropped him. He realized it wasn't the Rime Hearth Inn. It had no sign in runes. It was just a house, perhaps a trap for the unwary traveler. Surviving this first test, he began to trust me. True skepticism was far too costly. He continued his search. He walked along a rough cobblestone street, where sparse light from the windows cast long, skewed shadows on the snow. In the dim light of a rusted lantern, he saw it. A small, round object, glittering in a crack in the ice. It was a coin. He stopped. He didn't have to bend down to know what it was. It was tarnished copper, but its edges were plated with bright gold. On the surface, he saw the faint etching of a Ferris wheel, disturbingly detailed. The Tro-Ring coin. The second test. He felt his jeans pocket. How much cash did he have left? Enough for dinner? A small, practical voice in his head began to whisper. Pick it up. It's just money. You might need it. You don't have to spend it here. The temptation was horrific. The coin glittered as if proclaiming value. He recalled Jim's story. The tongue. The language. These entities couldn't lie, but they worshipped the absolute balance of transaction. Using false currency to buy something real would result in the forfeiture of something equally valuable. He tried to ignore it, but his steps slowed. He stared at the coin, feeling a cold pull. He used to pick up loose change as a child. It was habit. He clenched his hands into fists, pushing back the urge to stoop. He forced himself to step over it. The moment the tip of his shoe passed the edge of the ice where the coin lay, a bone-chilling gust of wind swept through. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the coin was gone. No trace, no indent in the snow. He had been watched. The dwarf hunters had seen him, tested him, and he had passed. Relief spread, followed immediately by cold dread. These rules were not superstition. They were laws of spiritual physics. Finally, he found the Rime Hearth Inn. Its sign, sturdy oak, featured bold runes highlighted beneath a large lantern. This time, he made no mistake. He knocked 3 times. "The mortal here, requesting entry," he shouted, his voice now firm. The voice that replied was hoarse but clear, without false sweetness. "Do enter, the mortal. You must have waited long." He sighed with relief, opened the door, and stepped inside. The interior held the dry warmth of wood and peat smoke. The proprietress, Helga, tall and with calloused hands, nodded indifferently. She pointed to a corner. "Attic, room number 7. Heat is on. Drop your things and come back down for dinner, venison stew." He quickly dropped his luggage in the attic. The room was small, clean, with a window overlooking the square. He went back down, his stomach rumbling from the hunger accumulated in the cold jeep. As he ate his dinner, Helga sat down opposite him. "Heard you came here for the ruined sky?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's right. I hope to see it in the next few days." Helga pursed her lips, a smile utterly devoid of humor. "You're lucky. Or not. The recent storm cleansed the atmosphere. It will start in about an hour. The Aurora will dance sooner than expected." His heart skipped a beat again. Rule number 3. The Ruined Sky Festival. The Dead Man's Thoroughfare. The Clinging Spirits. "When does it end?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. 2-3 hours. Depends on the gods. But you shouldn't miss it. It's why Isgärd exists." He ate quickly, feeling the pressure of time. He hadn't anticipated it would happen on the very first night. After finishing his meal, he stood in the square with dozens of locals and a few other tourists, all gazing up at the dark sky. Just as Helga said, the night was torn open. Electric green began to flare, followed by streaks of purple and pink. The Aurora was not just light. It was movement, an endless flow of shapes like huge flags fluttering. It was majestic, chilling, and utterly terrifying. He knew he was looking at the dead man's thoroughfare. He felt a coldness that wasn't from temperature, but the coldness of emptiness, as if countless invisible eyes were sweeping over him. He tried not to think about the spirits, but he couldn't. He stood there for nearly an hour and a half, until he felt the light begin to dim and the movement slow down, as if the highway traffic had eased. It was time. Rule number 3. The third place. He looked around. People were beginning to disperse, most heading straight home. They were locals. Perhaps they had protection, or perhaps the spirits only sought new faces. He walked quickly, heading toward the edge of town, where he remembered seeing a faint neon light. He found it, the frozen mug. He knocked on the bar door, this time 3 light taps. "The mortal here, requesting entry." The bartender's voice responded, a sound of frustrated tiredness. "Do enter, the mortal. Who knocks on a bar door at this hour?" He stepped inside, feeling the warmth and the scent of beer and spirits. He had succeeded. He sat down at the bar, ordering a cup of black coffee, even though it was nearly midnight. "How long are you open?" he asked the bartender. "1 more hour. Or until the spirits stop bothering us," the bartender replied curtly, wiping down a glass. He looked at his watch, finding he only needed to sit here for 58 more minutes. He had passed the first 3 tests on his first night in Isgärd. He had not been locked in a monster's house. He had not been tempted by false currency. And now, he was successfully avoiding the dead. He sat there, listening to the wind howl outside, feeling the weight of isolation. He realized that in Isgärd, survival was not a grand victory, but a series of small, precise acts of compliance. Those entities couldn't lie. And because they couldn't lie, they had to establish rigid rules so that mortals would deceive themselves. He had done it correctly. Tonight, he would live. And he realized my final statement was not a wish, but a warning. May you not be the next monster. I hadn't meant that he would be transformed. I meant, In a place where truth is law, any self-deception is a rejection of humanity, and anyone who rejects the law designates themselves as a monster in their eyes. The night in Isgärd had only just begun. He took a sip of the coffee, hot and bitter, staring at his reflection in the bar mirror. He told himself he was still the mortal,